The dust-laden wind carried the distant sound of a baby's cry across the parched land as Elizabeth Morgan dipped her bucket into the well, her hands trembling from exhaustion and fear. 3 days since her husband's burial, and here she stood, alone with her 4 children in the merciless Arizona territory of 1879, the youngest still nursing and the oldest barely 7. The well outside Rattlesnake Gulch was her last hope for clean water before the scorching afternoon sun made travel impossible. Elizabeth wiped sweat from her brow, her fair skin already reddening despite the bonnet shading her face. The journey from their remote homestead had been grueling, but necessity drove her forward. With Thomas gone, taken by a rattlesnake bite while mending fences, she faced an impossible situation, a woman alone with 4 young children in unforgiving country. As she struggled to hoist the heavy bucket, a deep voice startled her. "Madam, let me help you with that." Elizabeth turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the sun. A cowboy atop a paint horse, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, the spurs on his boots jingling as he approached. "Thank you, but we're managing," Elizabeth said, instinctively stepping between the stranger and her children who waited in the small wagon. The man stopped, respecting her caution. "Name's Everett Wade, madam. I ride for the Double Creek Ranch just beyond those hills." He gestured westward. "Couldn't help but notice you're having a hard time, and those little ones look mighty tired." Elizabeth studied him carefully. His face was weathered but kind, with eyes the color of a clear summer sky. Unlike many men she'd encountered in these parts, there was no whiskey on his breath or menace in his stance. "Elizabeth Morgan," she replied finally. "My husband Thomas passed 3 days ago. We're trying to make it to my sister's place in Tucson." Everett's expression softened as he took in the scene, the 4 exhausted children in the wagon, the oldest boy valiantly trying to comfort a crying toddler, the infant swaddled against the heat, and the little girl clutching a worn rag doll. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Mrs. Morgan." A wail erupted from the wagon as the toddler's cries grew louder. Elizabeth's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of her circumstances momentarily overwhelming her composed facade. "May I?" Everett asked, gesturing toward the well. Elizabeth nodded, stepping aside as he easily drew up water, filling not only her bucket, but also the barrel secured to her wagon. "Those children look like they could use some shade and rest," he observed quietly. "My camp's just over that ridge. Nothing fancy, but there's a good creek and some trees for shade. You'd be welcome to stop there before continuing your journey." Elizabeth hesitated, weighing her options. The children were exhausted, hungry, and the day was growing hotter by the minute. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Wade," she said finally. "It's not charity to help a neighbor, Mrs. Morgan. Just decent behavior." The baby in the wagon began to cry, and Elizabeth's 7-year-old son called out, "Ma, Emily's hungry again." Everett watched as conflict played across Elizabeth's face. "Madam, I understand your caution. This territory ain't always kind to those traveling alone. But I give you my word as a man who was raised right, you and your children will come to no harm in my company." Elizabeth looked at her children, then back at Everett. "Very well, Mr. Wade. We'll accept your offer of shade for a few hours. The children need rest before we continue." As they approached the wagon together, the children eyed the stranger warily. Elizabeth introduced them one by one: Edward, age 7, Sarah, 5, Michael, nearly 3, and baby Emily, just 4 months old. "Pleased to meet you all," Everett said, tipping his hat to the children. He crouched down to eye level with Edward. "That's a fine hat you've got there, young man." Edward touched the brim of his father's too large hat, which he'd insisted on wearing since the burial. "It was my pa's," he said solemnly. "Well, he must have been a good man to have such fine children," Everett replied gently. As Elizabeth gathered the baby into her arms, Everett turned to her. "Mrs. Morgan, I don't mean to overstep, but Tucson's a hard 4-day journey from here, especially with little ones and in this heat." "We have no choice," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Everett looked at the children again, taking in their tired faces and dusty clothes. Then he made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Mrs. Morgan, I'll be straight with you. These young ones need more than a few hours' rest. They need proper food and shelter." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can escort you all to Tucson safely, or, if you're amenable, you could stay at my place until you're rested proper. Got a small ranch house with room enough. Nothing fancy, but it's solid and safe. Elizabeth stiffened. Mr. Wade, while I appreciate your concern, I understand your hesitation, he interrupted gently. But please know my offer comes with no expectations beyond providing safe passage or temporary shelter. My mother raised me to help those in need, and he glanced at the children, his expression softening. I have a special place in my heart for little ones who've lost their pa, lost mine when I was not much older than your Edward there. Something in his tone made Elizabeth pause. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his eyes, or simply her own desperate circumstances, but she found herself considering his offer. These children are all I have left in this world, Mr. Wade, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Everett's gaze met hers, steady and sincere. I'll take care of them like I made them myself, the cowboy told the mother at the well. And you too, madam. You have my word. In that moment, with the sun beating down and her children's futures hanging in the balance, Elizabeth made a choice that would forever alter their path. We'll accept your escort to my sisters in Tucson, she said. But first, I think we all could use that rest you mentioned. Everett nodded, understanding that trust would come slowly, if at all. That's a wise decision, madam. Let me help you get the little ones settled, and then we can be on our way to my camp. As they traveled the short distance to Everett's camp, Elizabeth wondered if she had made the right choice. But watching him gently lead her wagon, occasionally looking back to make sure they were managing, she felt the first flutter of something she hadn't expected hope. Everett's camp proved to be more substantial than Elizabeth had imagined. Nestled in a grove of cottonwoods beside a clear running creek, it offered blessed shade and the soothing sound of flowing water. A small lean-to provided shelter, and a fire pit with a cooking tripod suggested he'd been planning to stay for more than just a night. You're welcome to rest in the lean-to, madam, Everett said as he helped her down from the wagon. I've got some beans and bacon I can fix up, and there's coffee too if you've a mind for it. Thank you, Elizabeth replied, surprised by his preparedness. I have some cornbread left from yesterday that would go well with that. While Everett tended to the horses, Elizabeth settled the children. Edward remained watchful, staying close to his mother's side, while Sarah and Michael ventured cautiously toward the creek, entranced by the water. Not too close, Elizabeth warned them. I've got a fishing line, Everett called over. Maybe Edward would like to try his hand while we prepare the meal? Edward looked up at his mother, a spark of interest in his eyes that she hadn't seen since his father's death. Can I, Ma? He asked quietly. Elizabeth nodded, and Everett soon had the boy set up by the creek, patiently showing him how to bait the hook and cast the line. Sarah and Michael watched in fascination, momentarily forgetting their grief and exhaustion. As Elizabeth fed baby Emily, she observed Everett with her other children. He was gentle but not condescending, speaking to them as though their thoughts and questions mattered. It had been a long time since anyone had treated her children with such respect. When the meal was ready, they gathered around the fire. The food was simple but filling, and even picky Michael ate without complaint. As they finished eating, Everett pulled a harmonica from his pocket. Would the young ones mind some music? He asked. Please do, Elizabeth said, surprised again. The sweet, mournful notes of Beautiful Dreamer filled the air, and Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been Thomas's favorite song. She quickly blinked them away, not wanting to sadden the children who were finally showing signs of relaxation. After the music, as the afternoon heat began to wane, Everett suggested they continue their journey. We can make it to my place before sundown, he explained. It's more comfortable than this camp, and safer too. Elizabeth hesitated again. Mr. Wade, I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't want to impose further. No imposition, Mrs. Morgan. My ranch is on the way to Tucson anyway. Better to have a proper roof over these little ones' heads tonight, and you can continue your journey tomorrow if you wish. Logic won out over caution. Night in the open with 4 small children was dangerous, and they were all exhausted. Very well, she agreed. But we'll be on our way at first light. Everett nodded, respecting her decision. Of course, madam. As they packed up camp, Elizabeth noticed Edward helping Everett, mimicking the man's movements as he secured their belongings. It warmed her heart to see her son taking an interest in something again. The journey to Everett's ranch took just over 2 hours. As they crested a small rise, Elizabeth saw a modest homestead nestled against a backdrop of rugged hills. A small, well-built cabin stood in a clearing, with a barn and corral nearby. A vegetable garden was visible to one side, and chickens pecked in a fenced yard. "It's not much," Everett said, almost apologetically, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Elizabeth replied honestly, surprised by the care evident in the property. As they approached, a border collie raced out to greet them, followed by an older man who emerged from the barn. "That's Charlie," Everett explained. "He helps out around the place. Best ranch hand in the territory, though he'd never admit it." Charlie proved to be a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 60s, with a limp from an old cavalry injury. He showed no surprise at the arrival of a widow and 4 children, simply nodding at Everett as though he'd expected nothing less of the younger man. "Got the spare room ready," Charlie announced. "Put fresh linens on the bed and aired it out." "Thank you, Charlie," Everett replied. "Mrs. Morgan and her children will be staying the night before continuing to Tucson." Charlie's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment beyond, "Supper's on in an hour." Venison stew. The small ranch house was clean and orderly, with simple but sturdy furniture. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end. 2 doors led off to bedrooms, and a ladder indicated a loft space above. "You and the children can have my room," Everett said, showing Elizabeth to a neat bedroom with a large bed. "I'll bunk in the loft." "We couldn't possibly take your bed," Elizabeth protested. "I insist, madam. There's plenty of room for you and the little ones, and the loft's comfortable enough for me." Too tired to argue further, Elizabeth accepted the arrangement. The bed was indeed large enough for her and all 4 children, though Edward insisted he was old enough to sleep on a pallet on the floor. Supper that evening was a quiet affair, with the children too tired to do more than eat before their eyes began drooping. After the meal, Elizabeth helped clean up while Everett carried the younger children to bed. She found him sitting beside them, softly telling a story about a brave young cowboy who protected his family from all manner of dangers. "You're good with them," she observed from the doorway. Everett looked up, a hint of sadness crossing his features. "Had a younger brother and sister once. Helped raise them after Pa died." "Where are they now?" Elizabeth asked. "Lost them both. Influenza took my sister when she was 16. Brother joined the army. Never came back from fighting the Comanche." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said, meaning it. Everett nodded, rising from the bedside. "Life out here takes more than it gives sometimes. But we go on." As promised, Elizabeth prepared to leave at first light the next morning. But as she rose and began to dress, baby Emily developed a worrying cough. By breakfast, the infant was feverish and struggling to nurse. "She needs a doctor," Everett said, concern evident in his voice. "The nearest one is in Tucson," Elizabeth replied, panic rising in her throat. "No, there's Doc Wilson in Silver Creek. It's closer, about 3 hours' ride from here." Everett was already reaching for his hat. "I can take you there. The other children, Charlie can look after them," Everett assured her. "He raised 6 of his own. They'll be safe here." Elizabeth hesitated, torn between keeping her family together and getting Emily the help she needed. "Mrs. Morgan," Everett said gently, "that baby needs a doctor sooner rather than later. Silver Creek's a good town with decent folks. Doc Wilson delivered half the children in the county. I wouldn't suggest separating you from your other little ones if I didn't think it was important." Looking down at Emily's flushed face, Elizabeth made her decision. "Very well. Let me explain to the children." Edward took the news stoically, promising to look after his younger siblings. Sarah clung to her mother until Charlie distracted her with the offer to help collect eggs from the chicken coop. Michael, too young to fully understand, was content with the promise of seeing the new foal in the barn. Within the hour, Elizabeth found herself in Everett's wagon, holding Emily close as they traveled towards Silver Creek. The baby's condition worsened during the journey, her tiny body burning with fever despite the cool cloths Elizabeth applied to her forehead. "How much further?" she asked anxiously as Emily's breathing became more labored. "Just over that ridge," Everett replied, urging the horses to a faster pace. "Hang on, little one," he murmured to the baby. We're almost there. Silver Creek proved to be larger than Elizabeth had expected, a proper town with a main street boasting several businesses, including a general store, a bank, and mercifully, a doctor's office. Everett pulled the wagon to a stop directly in front of a whitewashed building with Dr. Wilson, physician and surgeon, painted on the window. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor, examined Emily thoroughly before diagnosing lung fever. She's very ill, he told Elizabeth honestly. But she's a strong baby, and we've caught it early. I'll prepare a treatment. While the doctor mixed medicines, Everett paced the small waiting room. Is there anything else you need, Mrs. Morgan? Anything at all? Elizabeth shook her head, touched by his concern. You've done more than enough, Mr. Wade. I can't thank you adequately. No thanks needed, he replied. Just doing what any decent person would do. Dr. Wilson returned with a small bottle of medicine. She'll need this every 4 hours, day and night, for the next 3 days at least. And she should not travel until the fever breaks completely. Elizabeth's heart sank. We're supposed to be heading to Tucson. My children are safe with Charlie, Everett interjected. And Silver Creek has a decent hotel where you and Emily can stay until she's well enough to travel. I couldn't impose, Mrs. Morgan, Everett interrupted gently. Please let me help. I promised to see you and your children safely to Tucson, and I intend to keep that promise. But first, we need to get this little one well again. The hotel room was simple but clean, with a bed, a small table, and a rocking chair by the window. Everett carried their few belongings upstairs, then hesitated at the door. I'll check on the other children and let them know what's happening, he said. Then I'll come back tomorrow to see how Emily's doing, if that's all right with you. Elizabeth nodded, grateful beyond words. Thank you, Mr. Wade, for everything. After Everett left, Elizabeth sat in the rocking chair with Emily in her arms, administering the medicine as directed and praying fervently for her daughter's recovery. The night was long, with Emily waking frequently, fretful and uncomfortable despite the medicine. By morning, however, the baby's fever had diminished slightly, and she was able to nurse weakly. Elizabeth, exhausted but hopeful, had just dozed off in the rocking chair when a knock at the door startled her awake. It was Everett, hat in hand, with a basket containing food and supplies. Thought you might need these, he said, setting the basket on the table. There's fresh bread, some cheese, dried apples, and a jar of Mrs. Thornton's chicken soup. Best in the territory for what ails you. How are my children? Elizabeth asked immediately. They're fine, Everett assured her. Edward's taken to helping Charlie with the horses. Boys got a natural way with them. Sarah's appointed herself Michael's guardian, making sure he stays out of mischief. They miss you, of course, but they understand their sister needs you right now. Relief washed over Elizabeth. And Charlie doesn't mind? Mind. He's enjoying having young ones around again. Says it keeps him young. Everett smiled. Now, how's our little patient? The hour didn't escape Elizabeth's notice, but somehow, it felt right. Over the past few days, Everett had indeed treated her children as though they were his own responsibility. Her fever's down a bit, and she nursed this morning, Elizabeth replied. The doctor is coming by later to check on her. That's good news, Everett said, genuine relief in his voice. He hesitated, then added, Mrs. Morgan, I need to return to the ranch today to check on things, but I'll be back tomorrow with news of the children. Is there anything specific you'd like me to bring? Elizabeth thought for a moment. Sarah has a nightgown with blue ribbons she can't sleep without. And Edward might want his father's pocket watch. It's in my trunk. I'll make sure they're packed, Everett promised. And Mrs. Morgan, Elizabeth, if I may, please don't worry about anything except getting Emily well. Everything else is taken care of. The use of her given name should have felt presumptuous, but instead, it felt like a comfort, a small connection in a world where she had felt utterly alone just days before. Thank you, Everett, she replied softly. For the next 3 days, Emily's condition improved steadily. Dr. Wilson pronounced her out of danger on the 4th day, though he cautioned against traveling immediately. Give her another few days to regain her strength, he advised. Lung fever can recur if the patient is pushed too soon. During this time, Everett visited daily, bringing news of the other children and fresh supplies. He never stayed long, seeming to understand Elizabeth's need for space, but his brief visits became a highlight of her day. He always had a new story about something one of the children had said or done, and his obvious affection for them warmed Elizabeth's heart. On the seventh day, with Emily fully recovered and growing restless in the confines of the hotel room, Everett arrived with a proposal. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "The journey to Tucson is still long and could be hard on Emily so soon after her illness. I wonder if you might consider. That is, if you'd be willing to stay at the ranch a bit longer, just until you're sure she's strong enough for the journey." Elizabeth studied him, sensing there was more to the offer than mere practical concern. "Everett, you've already done so much for us. I can't continue to impose on your kindness." "It's no imposition," he replied earnestly. "The truth is, the children have brought life back to the place. Charlie's smiling more than I've seen in years. And I—" He paused, searching for words. "I've grown fond of them. Of all of you." The admission hung in the air between them, its implications both frightening and strangely thrilling. "I need to think about it," Elizabeth said finally. "My sister is expecting us." "Of course," Everett nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll abide by whatever decision you make." That evening, as Elizabeth rocked Emily to sleep, she weighed her options carefully. Her sister's home in Tucson would provide security, but it was small and already crowded with her own family of 5. Elizabeth had planned to find work as a seamstress there, but with 4 young children to care for, it would be difficult at best. And then there was Everett. In the short time she'd known him, he had shown himself to be honorable, kind, and genuinely fond of her children. The way Edward's eyes lit up when speaking of him, the way Sarah had started calling him Mr. Everett with such affection, even Michael's newfound confidence all testified to the positive impact he'd had on their lives. But could she trust these feelings developing between them? It had been less than 2 weeks since Thomas's death. Was she simply vulnerable, grasping at security for her children? The next morning, when Everett arrived to take them back to the ranch, Elizabeth had made her decision. "We'll stay until Emily is stronger," she told him. "But Everett, I need to be clear. I'm not in a position to. That is, it's too soon after Thomas." "I understand," he said gently. "There are no expectations, Elizabeth. Just the offer of a safe place for you and your children for as long as you need it." The reunion with her other children at the ranch was joyful and tearful. Edward had grown an inch, it seemed, in just the week they'd been apart. Sarah clung to her mother, babbling about the chickens and the garden and how Mr. Charlie had taught her to make biscuits. Michael showed off a small wooden horse Everett had carved for him. Life at the ranch quickly fell into a comfortable routine. Elizabeth took over the cooking and household management, grateful to contribute something in return for Everett's generosity. The children thrived in the open air, helping with age-appropriate chores and exploring the safe confines of the ranch yard. Everett, true to his word, made no romantic overtures, treating Elizabeth with respectful friendship. But she couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed her, or how he seemed to find reasons to be near her. For her part, Elizabeth found herself watching for his return each evening, enjoying their conversations by the fire after the children were asleep. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month, the planned temporary stay began to feel increasingly permanent. Elizabeth sent a letter to her sister in Tucson, explaining the situation and promising to visit soon. The reply was understanding and supportive, with her sister expressing gratitude that Elizabeth and the children had found such a good situation. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Everett broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Elizabeth," he began carefully, "I know you planned this as a temporary arrangement, and I respect that. But I want you to know that you and the children are welcome to stay as long as you wish. Permanently, if that's something you might consider." Elizabeth's heart quickened. "Everett, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking anything of you that you're not ready to give. I understand it's too soon, and that your heart still belongs to Thomas. I respect that deeply, but I want you to know that I've come to care for you and those children more than I thought possible. And if someday, when you're ready, if you could see your way to considering me as more than just a friend, well, that would make me the happiest man in the Arizona territory." Tears pricked at Elizabeth's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now," Everett assured her. "I just wanted you to know where I stand." The decision is yours, and there's no rush to make it. That night, lying in bed with Emily sleeping peacefully beside her, Elizabeth allowed herself to truly consider a future with Everett. Thomas had been a good husband and father, and she had loved him deeply. But he was gone, and she had 4 children who needed stability and love. And Everett, in the short time she'd known him, he had shown himself to be everything a woman could want in a partner. He was kind, honest, hard-working, and he loved her children as if they were his own. That phrase he'd spoken at the well, "I'll take care of them like I made them myself," had proven true in every way. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their relationship. Elizabeth found herself seeking Everett's company more often, enjoying the way he made her laugh and the thoughtful insights he shared. He began teaching Edward to ride, showing infinite patience as the boy struggled with his fear. He built a small garden plot for Sarah, helping her plant sunflowers and sweet peas. For Michael, he created a sandbox near the porch where the toddler could play within sight of his mother. And he spent hours gently rocking Emily, singing soft lullabies that soothed the baby to sleep. July brought sweltering heat and the town's Independence Day celebration. Everett invited Elizabeth and the children to attend with him, his eyes hopeful as he described the picnic, games, and fireworks planned for the occasion. It would be nice for the children to meet others their age. Elizabeth agreed, pleased by the invitation. The celebration was held in a meadow just outside Silver Creek. Bunting and flags decorated tables laden with food, and children ran laughing through the grass. For the first time since Thomas's death, Elizabeth felt a sense of community and belonging. Everett was clearly well respected in the town. People greeted him warmly, and he introduced Elizabeth and the children with obvious pride. No one questioned their relationship or living arrangement, accepting them as a family unit without comment. As twilight approached, Everett spread a blanket on a small hill overlooking the meadow. "Best view of the fireworks," he explained, helping Elizabeth settle with Emily in her arms. The other children nestled around them, their faces alight with anticipation. When the first colorful burst illuminated the sky, Michael climbed into Everett's lap, seeking security from the loud noise. Sarah leaned against Elizabeth's side, while Edward tried to maintain his composure despite his obvious excitement. In that moment, watching the joy on her children's faces and feeling Everett's steady presence beside her, Elizabeth realized they had already become a family in every way that mattered. The thought brought not guilt, but a sense of rightness and peace. As they drove home that night, the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Elizabeth reached over and took Everett's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Everett's fingers tightened around hers. "No need for thanks, Elizabeth. Having you and the children here, it's made this place a home again." The simple statement, spoken with such sincerity, moved something deep within her. When they arrived back at the ranch and had settled the sleeping children in their beds, Elizabeth joined Everett on the porch. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "About staying permanently." Everett turned to her, hope and caution warring in his expression. "And the children are happy here. Happier than I've seen them since before Thomas fell ill. They adore you, and it's clear you feel the same about them." She took a deep breath. "As for me, I've come to care for you, Everett, more than I thought possible in such a short time. It frightens me sometimes, how quickly you've become essential to us." "Elizabeth," Everett said, taking her hands in his, "I want you to know that I would never try to replace Thomas in your heart or in your children's memories. But I would be honored to build something new with you, a life together, raising these children and perhaps, someday, adding to our family." The mention of a future together, of possibly more children, sent a warm flush through Elizabeth. "I think I would like that," she admitted softly. Everett's smile was radiant in the moonlight. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. It was brief but filled with promise, and when he pulled back, Elizabeth found herself longing for more. "I should go in," she said, suddenly shy. "Of course," Everett replied, his voice husky. "Good night, Elizabeth." "Good night, Everett." The following Sunday, Everett suggested they attend church services in Silver Creek. "It would be good for the children," he said, "and for us to be part of the community." Elizabeth agreed, and they all dressed in their best clothes. Everett wore a clean black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and Elizabeth noticed several appreciative glances from single women in the congregation. The knowledge that this handsome, kind man had chosen her brought a warm glow of pride. After the service, as they were speaking with the minister, Everett kept his hand at the small of Elizabeth's back, a subtle gesture of claiming that didn't go unnoticed by the townspeople. The women who had been eyeing him now regarded Elizabeth with curiosity and, in some cases, envy. Mrs. Morgan and her children have been staying at my ranch while the baby recovered from lung fever, Everett explained to the minister. They've brought life back to the place. God works in mysterious ways, the minister replied with a knowing smile, bringing you together in such circumstances. On the ride home, Edward, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Mr. Wade, are you going to marry my ma? The blunt question caused Elizabeth to gasp, but Everett merely chuckled. Well, Edward, that would be up to your mother. But I admit, I'd like that very much, if she'd have me. All eyes turned to Elizabeth, whose cheeks burned with embarrassment. Children, this is not a proper conversation for, but Ma, Sarah interrupted. Don't you like Mr. Everett? He makes the best pancakes, and he never gets mad when Michael spills things. High praise indeed, Everett said, his eyes twinkling as he glanced at Elizabeth. I think what your mother means, he continued, addressing the children, is that grown-ups need time to make important decisions like marriage. It's not something to be rushed into, even when people care for each other very much. But you do care for Ma, don't you? Edward persisted. Very much, Everett confirmed. I care for all of you. Then why wait? Sarah asked with a child's logic. Pa always said when something's right, you should grab it with both hands. Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes at the mention of Thomas. But strangely, the words brought comfort rather than pain, as if Thomas himself were giving his blessing. Your pa was a wise man, Everett said gently. And I promise you, Sarah, that I won't let fear or hesitation stand in the way of what's right. But I also need to be respectful of your mother's feelings and wishes. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Elizabeth caught Everett watching her thoughtfully for the remainder of the journey. That night, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth found Everett on the porch, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars. I'm sorry about the children's questions today, she said, joining him. They can be rather direct. Everett chuckled. No need to apologize. Children have a way of cutting through pretense. And they asked fair questions. Elizabeth nodded, gathering her courage. Everett, I've been thinking a great deal about our situation. About the future. He turned to face her, setting his pipe aside. And what have you concluded? That life is unpredictable and often too short, she said softly. That happiness should be embraced when found. That my children deserve a father who loves them, and I. She took a deep breath. I deserve a chance at love again. Everett's eyes widened. Elizabeth, are you saying? I'm saying yes, Everett. Yes to staying. Yes to building a life together. Yes to loving you. If you'll be patient with me as I learn how. In one fluid motion, Everett was on his feet, gathering her into his arms. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more urgent, filled with promise and passion. Elizabeth responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she surrendered to the feelings she'd been holding at bay. When they finally parted, both breathless, Everett rested his forehead against hers. I've been carrying something with me, he admitted, reaching into his pocket. Hoping for the right moment, he withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he explained. She made me promise to give it only to a woman who would bring joy and love back into my life. Elizabeth Morgan, will you marry me? Elizabeth stared at the beautiful ring, then up into Everett's hopeful face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Everett Wade. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Elizabeth felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't betraying Thomas. It was honoring life by embracing love where it was found. When? Everett asked, his voice husky with emotion. Soon, Elizabeth replied. The children need stability, and I don't want to wait to begin our life together. They agreed on a simple ceremony in 2 weeks' time, to be held at the small church in Silver Creek with just the children, Charlie, and a few close friends in attendance. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community, and Elizabeth was touched by the warm congratulations they received. The day before the wedding, a letter arrived from Elizabeth's sister in Tucson, expressing her delight at the news and promising to visit in the fall. "I always worried about you being alone with the children," she wrote. "To know you found not just security but love again brings me such joy." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Sarah had been particularly excited about her role as flower girl, practicing her walk down the aisle for days. Edward would stand with Everett as his best man, a responsibility the boy took very seriously. Michael, too young for a specific role, would sit with Charlie, while baby Emily would be cradled in Elizabeth's arms during the ceremony, a symbol of their ready-made family. Elizabeth wore a simple blue dress that Everett had insisted on buying for her in Silver Creek. "A bride should have something new," he'd said, brushing aside her protests about the expense. As she prepared in the small room at the back of the church, there was a knock at the door. It was Edward, looking unusually solemn in his Sunday best. "Ma, can I talk to you?" he asked. "Of course, sweetheart," Elizabeth replied, concerned by his serious expression. "Is something wrong?" Edward fidgeted with his collar. "I was just thinking about Pa. Do you think he'd be mad that you're marrying Mr. Wade?" Elizabeth's heart constricted. She knelt down to eye level with her son. "Edward, your father loved us very much. He would want us to be happy and safe. And I believe, with all my heart, that he would approve of Everett. Not because Everett is trying to replace him, no one could ever do that, but because Everett loves us and will take care of us." Edward nodded slowly. "I think so too. And I like Mr. Wade a lot. He's teaching me to ride and rope, just like Pa was going to." "Yes, he is," Elizabeth agreed, blinking back tears. "And he's doing it because he loves you, Edward, just like your Pa did. Can I call him Pa too? Not right away, but someday?" Edward asked hesitantly. "I think, when you're ready. That would make Everett very happy," Elizabeth replied, touched by her son's question. "But there's no rush. You take all the time you need." The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Elizabeth walked down the aisle with Emily in her arms, preceded by Sarah scattering wildflower petals. Everett waited at the altar, his eyes filling with tears when he saw her. Edward stood tall beside him, chest puffed out with importance. The minister spoke of new beginnings and God's blessings, but Elizabeth barely heard the words, focused instead on Everett's face and the love shining there. When it came time for the vows, Everett's voice rang clear and strong. "I, Everett James Wade, take you, Elizabeth and Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you all the days of my life. I pledge to be a loving father to your children, to protect and guide them as if they were my own flesh and blood. In sickness and in health, in good times and bad, my heart and home are yours forever." Elizabeth's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, adding, "I bring to you not just myself, but 4 children who already love you. I promise to build a home filled with joy, respect, and love, a family bound not just by blood or law, but by choice and commitment." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Everett's kiss was tender and reverent. As they turned to face their small gathering of well-wishers, Elizabeth felt a profound sense of peace. This was right. This was meant to be. The small reception was held at the Silver Creek Hotel, with a special cake baked by the hotel owner's wife and plenty of lemonade for the children. Charlie, usually so taciturn, gave a surprisingly emotional toast. "Known this boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper," he said, nodding toward Everett. "Watched him grow into one of the finest men I've ever had the privilege to know. Elizabeth, you and these young uns have brought the light back to his eyes. And Everett," he turned to the groom, "you remember what I told you the day you found this family at the well?" Everett nodded, smiling. "You said some things are meant to be, and a man's got to recognize a blessing when it crosses his path." "Wisest words I ever spoke," Charlie affirmed, raising his glass. To the Wade family. The journey back to the ranch, their home now, was filled with tired but happy children. Michael fell asleep almost immediately, while Sarah chattered excitedly about her successful flower girl duties. Edward rode up front with Everett, asking serious questions about their cattle operation, clearly feeling his new role as the man of the family alongside his stepfather. That night, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth and Everett stood on the porch of their home, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Happy, Mrs. Wade," Everett murmured against her ear. "Very," Elizabeth replied, leaning back against his solid chest. "Though it still seems like a dream sometimes how quickly our lives have changed. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come unexpected," Everett said. "When I rode to that well, I was just aiming to help a woman and her children in need. I never imagined I'd find my heart's desire." Elizabeth turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "When you said you'd take care of my children like you made them yourself, I thought it was just a kind thing to say. I never dreamed you'd truly come to love them as your own." "I meant every word," Everett replied, his eyes serious. "From that first moment, something told me you and those children were meant to be in my life. I just had to convince you of it. You did a fine job of that." Elizabeth laughed softly, then grew serious. "Everett, I want you to know. I do love you. It's different from what I felt for Thomas, not less, just different. And I'm grateful every day that you found us at that well." "So am I, my love," Everett whispered before capturing her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and happiness to come. In the years that followed, the Wade Ranch prospered and grew, as did the family. A year after their wedding, Elizabeth gave birth to a son they named James Thomas Wade, a name honoring both Everett's father and Elizabeth's first husband. 2 years later, a daughter followed, completing their family of 8. Edward grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the ranch management alongside Everett. Sarah developed her mother's skill with a needle, creating beautiful quilts and clothing. Michael, always the adventurous one, became an excellent horseman. Emily had no memory of a time before Everett, calling him Pa from her earliest words. And the younger children grew up knowing the story of how their family came together, how a chance meeting at a well had led to a lifetime of love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Everett presented Elizabeth with a special gift, a small silver well replica, engraved with the words that had started their journey. "I'll take care of them like I made them myself." "You've more than kept that promise," Elizabeth told him, tears in her eyes as she looked around at their thriving family. "Best promise I ever made," Everett replied, taking her hand in his. "And the easiest to keep." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate widow to beloved wife, from uncertainty to security, from grief to joy, the path had not always been easy, but it had led her home. And home, she had learned, wasn't just a place. It was wherever Everett and their children were, a family forged by love, choice, and the unexpected blessing of a cowboy's promise at a well.